There was once a poor old farmer who had worked the fields all of his life, day in, day out, never doing any better than just scraping by. And all he had to help him in his labours were his faithful old horse and his son. Well, one day that horse, which had pulled the plough so faithfully all those years, that horse just upped and died. And the old farmer's friends were quick to gather around to offer their sympathies on his misfortune. "What a sad thing," they all said, "that your faithful old horse has died." "Well," the farmer replied phlegmatically, "it's too soon to tell." Well, as it happened, just about that time, an insurance policy that the farmer had bought years before and had completely forgotten, well, it matured and he came into a little money, and with that money he could buy another horse. "Isn't it great," all of his friends chorused when they gathered around to celebrate this piece of good fortune. "You can get another horse." "Well," replied the farmer, "it's too soon to tell." Well, pretty soon, though, it became very evident that this new horse, fine-looking beast though it was, had no heart for the drudgery of pulling a plough. It just refused to be yoked into that kind of menial work. The farmer's friends were quick to come around. "What a shame, you spent all that money on a horse that is useless in the field," they cried. "Well," replied the farmer, so the horse was released to roam free in the field, and the farmer noticed how fleet it was. Why, that horse could run faster than any other horse the farmer had ever seen. So he decided to enter it in a local horse race. And sure enough, the horse won, and with it a handsome purse. The neighbours were around like a shot. "How fabulous," they exclaimed, "that this horse is a racehorse. You've won all this money, likely will win even more money. This horse is going to make your fortune." "Well," replied the farmer. Now, the farmer's young son decided one Saturday afternoon that he wanted to ride this frisky horse. So one day he saddled up and away he rode. Unfortunately, the only horse that he had ever ridden before was the faithful old plough horse, which at best could summon up a gentle plod. But now he was on a horse racing at full gallop. It wasn't long, of course, before he fell off. He broke his leg badly. There was a knock on the door. The neighbours. "How awful," they wailed, "that your son has broken his leg, he's permanently crippled, he's not going to be able to help you in the fields as he used to." "Well," replied the farmer, wasn't long after, war broke out, and all the young men in the county marched off proudly to fight, all that is, except for the crippled farmer's son. And all of those young men, in one terrible battle, were killed. And the grief-stricken neighbours came to the farmer. "How lucky you are that your son did not go off to fight and die." And the farmer replied, "Well, now I know that Easter was actually last weekend. I haven't got my dates mixed up, but it wouldn't be the first time if I had. But here's the thing, the story of Easter did not end last Sunday. It's not as if the disciples learned of the empty tomb and immediately thought to themselves, "What ho, chaps! Granted, it has been a rather gloomy couple of days, what with Jesus being crucified and all, but we hadn't counted on that, true. But now he is risen and everything is just tickety-boo, and we can set about proclaiming the gospel of the risen Christ, and we'll all live happily ever after as the founders of a great new religion." No. What did it mean on that first Easter morning? Well, it was too soon to tell. And this morning I want to put it to you that the story of Jesus in the Easter event and what follows is one of the most compelling narratives of what it means for us, you and me, here, today, right now, to be fully alive to our own humanity in all the uncertainties and ambiguities and unpredictabilities of our own time. What it means for us, you and me, here, today, right now, to be fully open to the divinity that might yet shine within us. What it means for us, you and me, here today, right now, on Earth Day, to realise that we are custodians with duties and responsibilities far beyond ourselves. What it means for us, you and me, here today, right now, to embrace life in all of its grubbiness and its grandeur. To stand firm in faith that life is good, that we are blessed beyond words to be part of it, and it matters what we do with it. Even if, especially if, we can never know for certain what any of it means. Even if, especially if, we can never even know if it means anything at all. Does our life have any meaning? Well, it's too soon to tell. All of us live within a context which is always and ever too large for us to comprehend in our own time. What is the meaning of your life? Never mind such a huge question as that. What about that thing that happened to you just yesterday? Was it a piece of fortune good or bad? Was it cause for celebration or consolation? Take any example that's happened to you in your life. Perhaps, as an example, perhaps the job you applied for had your heart set on and then didn't get, which left you discouraged, deflated, and at the time it was such a bitter pill of disappointment. But then you applied for something else and you got it, and it turned out to be so much more rewarding and fulfilling than the other job would ever have been. Or the new relationship in which you feel first such giddy delight, but which later turns sour, and you wonder why you ever allowed yourself to be seduced into something in the first place which caused later such anguish. Any decision we make, any event which befalls us, is it for good or is it for ill? Well, it's too soon to tell. You're good. That farmer, I think we can safely assume, was not in Jerusalem on that fateful Friday when Jesus was crucified. But if he had been, and someone had come up to him and said, "Well, isn't it terrible? All of our hopes in this man cruelly dashed." Or if they had said, "Thank goodness we've finally got rid of that troublesome preacher," I suspect he would have replied, because it's always too soon to tell whether our present endeavours will be for the longer term good or ill of ourselves or others. It's always too soon to tell if the processes of the present are laying welcome or unwelcome foundations for the future. For in the depths of our greatest despair can be born our fondest hope. In the midst of seeming death can be found the ultimate triumph of life. In the most impenetrable darkness, even the smallest candle can cast the most welcome light. When a certain chap was elected president last November, most of us me certainly, most of us were deeply distressed, fearful of the horrors about to be unleashed. I was then. I still am. All the early evidence is that those fears were well-founded. And on the other hand, forces of resistance and resilience have been aroused and strengthened. Perhaps his election and the threat it poses to the very basis of democracy and human decency, perhaps that was the blip in history that will lead to the strengthening of democracy and increased vigilance by all of us for the rights of all of us. Will it be? Well, it's too soon to tell. On this Earth Day, the environment is under even more draconian assault from those whose only interest seems to be how much money they can make for themselves in the very short term. Nothing seems immune to their depredations. Not the water we drink, nor the air we breathe, nor the soil in which all things grow. Our efforts to protect the environment might seem so small and puny, hardly worth the while when pitted against such forces of indifference and disdain. Will those marches for science held yesterday all around the globe have any impact? We don't know. Anytime you feel you want to say it. We can only know that any small effort might prove to be a turning point. Any seemingly small effort might prove a turning point. Any candle we light might be that which ultimately dispels the darkness. On one of the sheep stations in the Australian outback, on which I was a jackaroo in my wayward youth, there was a noxious weed called Bathurst burr. It clung to sheep's wool like Velcro, making it painful and difficult to handle the sheep, especially for shearers at shearing time. On this particular station, we were very vigilant against it. Whenever we found a patch of the weed, we would stop and dig it up. And one day I remember I said to the boss, "Why do we bother?" when days later we might find yet more weeds in that same location. And he replied that he knew we would never totally eradicate the weed, but doing nothing would mean that it would soon take over. We could not know that our efforts would mean success. We could only know that doing nothing would mean failure. In working to defend and care for our environment, we can never know if our efforts will bring success. We can know only that doing nothing will bring failure. Who could have foretold that first Easter in Jerusalem and the immediate aftermath? What far-reaching and profound consequences would ensue as the result of the life and death of that obscure peripatetic preacher from Palestine? Who could have foretold that 2,000 years later, that life and death and what followed would be commemorated by millions, billions around the world? In the first many decades of the fledgling Christian church, it clung to the very edges of survival. At any moment, it could have succumbed to the forces of oppression and persecution which were all around it. Those first disciples had no way of knowing what the future held for this fledgling new faith, because it was the miracle of Easter is made more so, no less, not less, by believing in the full and unambiguous humanity of Jesus, human, just like the rest of us. Had Jesus been a deity, God incarnate, sent knowingly to die for our sins, all part of some master cosmic plan, then the ordeal of his crucifixion, unpleasant as it would have been little more than a passing inconvenience, a temporary discomfort before he returned to heaven and glory. But if Jesus was fully and solely human, as I believe he was, and even more importantly, if his disciples were fully and solely human, as surely they were, then therein is the true power and impact of this abiding story. It is not a story about the victory of God over death. It is a story about the victory of living fully in the face of death, living fully beyond death, living in the uncertainty of each and every moment, not knowing what the import of that moment might be. We too, like those first disciples, are fully and solely human. We too, like them, are frail, faltering, fearful. In a time when what we stand for is under assault, yet we, yes, even we might, like them, be laying the foundations for something the like of which we cannot imagine. Even in the face of what seems at best like dread, uncertainty, and ambiguity, and at worst, like defeat and annihilation. It is the false seduction to which people like us are so very vulnerable, people like us accustomed for the most part to power and influence. It's a false seduction that we demand certainty, and we want it now. What do we want? Certainty. When do we want it? Now. If we are not guaranteed the success of our actions, we too easily surrender the struggle. But we can never know what will be the impact of our lives, the sum effect we have upon the gradual unfolding of the human enterprise. It's always too soon to tell. We cannot know in our own immediate time frame. Kings and warriors, mighty and proud in their own time, have disappeared to history without trace. And an impoverished itinerant preacher who never travelled beyond his own immediate country, who wrote no books, who died in humiliating circumstances, is remembered and revered 20 centuries later. We are told that Jesus' last words on the cross were, "It is finished." Actually, it was just starting. Even he didn't know. It was too soon even for him to tell. Each of us has to come to terms with our own mortality, our own finiteness. How to do that has been one of the most penetrating and persistent of all religious questions. Given that we have to die each and every day, how are we to live? It's never for us to take full and final measure of our own lives. The miracle to which the post-Easter event story gives abundant testimony is that death does not negate life. Despair does not negate hope. The challenge, which is ever before us, is to believe and to continue to believe, in spite of all the disasters and the ills which might befall us, in spite of our littleness and our frailty, in spite of our humanness, that how we live today is of lasting value. How we relate to other people and to the world matters, and it matters deeply. And that what reconciliations we make with ourselves and with our world and with our neighbours and with our God affect the entirety of creation beyond our knowing. We can never know the full story of our own lives, because that story continues to unfold long after our deaths. We cannot know because it is too soon to tell. It is always too soon to tell. But we can have faith, because the time for faithful living is always right now. Amen.